Thank you for joining this training on Quality First Teaching for Teaching Assistants, delivered by the Standards and Effectiveness team here at West Sussex County Council. This training is intended for teaching assistants, learning support assistants, or any other adult who is working to support a teacher with children's learning or delivering learning themselves. During the training, we'll only refer to teaching assistants, but in doing so, we mean anyone who meets this criteria, whatever you may be called in your school. There's quite a lot of information in this presentation, and some of it may be new to you, so it may be helpful as we go to write down new learning, any questions that you may need to ask once the training is finished, and any actions you need to take to ensure this training has an impact on the young people you work with. So if you need to, please pause the video to grab something to write with or on. So let's have a look at what the aims are for this session, which is the first of two training sessions for teaching assistants. Firstly, we want you to understand what we mean by quality first teaching, a phrase which is used frequently in schools now, but which can mean different things to different people. We also want you to understand why quality first teaching is so important to improve the outcomes for children. By outcomes, we don't just mean whether they achieve the expected standard in reading and writing at Key Stage 2, or what their GCSE grades are at the end of Key Stage 4. We also mean how much they learn every lesson and whether they even attend lessons in the first place. All these are important outcomes that improve the life chances of children. Next, we want you to know what the building blocks are that form the foundation of quality first teaching. And finally, we'll consider the next steps you might take to transfer this learning into your own practice and look ahead to further training in session 2. This training has been designed to link to other training and support delivered by our colleagues in West Sussex that you might have engaged with. This may include the SEND and Inclusion Advisory Team, the Learning and Behaviour Advisory Team, and the Autism and Social Communication Team, and so on. We've worked hard to ensure this training aligns with any of the training delivered by these teams. However, it's also really important to understand that quality first teaching is about meeting the needs of all children, not just those with special educational needs or disabilities. What we talk about today will be important for any child in your school, regardless of their individual needs, although, of course, how they're implemented should be adapted depending on who you're working with. As a profession, we're keen to draw on the best evidence available. This report by the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF, published in 2021, draws on a large body of evidence and research and makes 7 recommendations for making the best use of teaching assistants. Please pause the video for a few moments to read the key recommendations that they make. Engaging in this session, we hope will support you with each of these recommendations. So now let's take a moment to consider what we mean by quality first teaching. This is a phrase that's used frequently in schools now and was first introduced in 2008 in a publication by what was then the Department for Children, Schools and Families. Just 2 sentences were used to summarise what quality first teaching is, although as we'll see it is a bit more complicated than that. Quality first teaching is underpinned by these key ideas. Firstly, it draws on a repertoire of teaching strategies and techniques. Quality first teaching is a toolkit of pedagogy, and by pedagogy we mean an approach that helps people learn. It's not just a single strategy. These strategies and techniques must be closely matched to specified learning objectives. Everyone in the lesson, the teacher, the children, and of course the teaching assistants, must know precisely what the intended learning is in that particular moment. It should meet the particular needs of the children and young people in the class. Remember, this is not just about special educational needs. Quality first teaching must meet the needs of all the children in the lesson. Quality First teaching demands 100% participation from the pupils. Everyone is engaged in the intended learning because they can access it and they know what they need to do. Letting them off is letting them down. And finally, Quality First teaching sets high and realistic challenges for all children. Now remember, Quality First teaching is a repertoire of strategies and techniques. So let's take a look at some examples of what these may be. The building blocks might include retrieval practice, chunking information into smaller parts, scaffolding to support learning, modelling with instruction, building vocabulary, effective questioning, and many more. There'll be much more about this later in the training session and in the next one too. So why is a Quality First teaching approach so important? Let's look at some of the evidence to support this approach. This document is the Education Endowment Foundation's Guide to Pupil Premium. Schools receive additional funding called the Pupil Premium to support their work with children in families who are socio-economically disadvantaged to try to narrow the gap in progress between them and their peers. They're clear that ensuring an effective teacher is in the front of every class and that every teacher is supported to keep improving is the key ingredient of a successful school. And by an effective teacher, we mean one that delivers Quality First teaching in every lesson and every day. Now that's for teachers, but what about teaching assistants? Again, the EEF research, based on 65 studies, shows that teaching assistant interventions can help children make up to 4 months additional progress. However, this is very dependent on how they're deployed and the training they've received. There is evidence that targeted deployment, where teaching assistants are trained to deliver interventions to small groups or individuals, has a higher impact. Also, there's evidence that investing in professional development for teaching assistants to deliver structured interventions can be effective in improving learning outcomes. In both cases, we would argue that what makes the real difference is the precise training and the professional development that teaching assistants are receiving. There's not yet been enough research showing how effective this is in whole class situations.
This section will take you through the neuroscience of learning. Firstly, neuroscience can be described as the scientific study of the nervous system and its functions. By nervous system, for the purpose of this training session, we are specifically referring to the brain and memory. So, to get us started on this section, I'd like you all to do a little activity on memory. Get a pen and a bit of paper and let's get ready to pull some answers from your memory. First question, what is your address? Easy one, right? Surely everyone knows where they live, but let's see how we get on from here. Second question, what did you have for dinner last Tuesday? Now, if you routinely have the same thing for dinner on a Tuesday without fail, then this will be very easy for you to answer. However, if not, it might take you a while to think about this one. Third question, what was the phone number in your parents' house when you were growing up? Yep, I should have warned you, these questions might get harder as we progress. Fourth question, what is the 16-digit number on your debit card? Anyone? Chunking 4 digits at a time sometimes helps people to learn this very long number. But do we really need to know it off by heart? Fifth and final question, what did your last supermarket shop cost? So, You will see from the questions asked that there are some, like our address, that we all knew the answer to because this is stored in our current or short-term memory as we are currently living there now. Where other questions, there's probably no tangible reason to have to remember or learn that information. This will now bring us on to the next section on the neuroscience of learning. As explained earlier, neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system and its functions. For the purpose of this presentation, we will be referring to the brain's function in memory. When you hear the word neuroscience, what comes to mind? Is it working memory, long-term memory, or short-term memory? We will be exploring more of these different aspects of memory later on in the presentation. My next question to you is, why is it important to understand the neuroscience of learning in order to effectively support our pupils? Firstly, understanding the neuroscience of learning will help to support our pupils with techniques for knowledge retrieval. These include chunking or breaking down longer or more complex tasks into smaller, more manageable pieces. Repetition. This is repeating concepts or keywords until they become more familiar. Rehearsal. This is reviewing information regularly until it becomes more memorable. We can also use concrete examples such as visual aids or manipulatives or stimuli, which will help with consolidating knowledge and practice. Organization or association. This is sequencing learning and also linking this learning to something more relatable and familiar. Now that we have covered the definition of neuroscience, let's now look at how we learn. What do we know about how we learn? Items need to be relevant to us. They also need to be meaningful. For example, your home address. Items need to be connected or linked, and that will help us to remember more. Repetition, doing the same thing over and over again, can help it to stick. Chunking, breaking complex tasks down into smaller ones, or not dissimilar to the 16-digit card number, learning each one in fours. Clarity, when items are clear or the task is clear, the instructions are simple, it does sometimes help with how we learn. There are a few other things that we can look at about how we learn. Recapping, retrieval, sometimes at the start of a lesson, in the middle of the lesson, or towards the end of the lesson about what we have covered. Smaller component knowledge, so breaking down a massive topic into smaller areas that are a lot more digestible. Cognitive load, being aware of our working memory and how many items we can actually store at once. And last, but by no means least, when things are experiential. And by that, I mean lived experiences, things that we have encountered or seen, heard, or things that we are working on, a combination of all of the above. That is how we can look at how we learn. Having now covered the section on the benefits of retrieval practice, let's summarize some strategies to build working memory so that our pupils can know more and remember more. I'm hoping you will have remembered that we touched on a few of these earlier in the presentation. Examples are naming and labeling, repetition and or rehearsal, using concrete examples and visual aids, organization, association or categorizing, and chunking. The image on the right also demonstrates some ways that we can help to build working memory, i.e., the part of our memory that we are currently using. Some of these strategies may include making meaningful connections when learning a new concept, chunking information, like the 16-digit number on your debit card that we spoke about earlier, breaking it down into 4 lots of 4 and learning each section separately, if you wanted to, and also using games, puzzles, and songs to consolidate learning. Whilst we can learn strategies to build and improve our working memory, we also need to be aware that there are some limitations to this. Working memory is a cognitive system with a limited capacity that can hold information temporarily. Working memory can usually hold about 4 items at a time, and you will soon see that I have 4 items here in my bulleted list to endorse this point. Working memory is fragile in storage, and we will learn more about this in the next slide about the forgetting curve. Anxiety, worry, or distractions can hinder or inhibit working memory performance. Cognitive load causes performance error. In other words, too many instructions, too many complex tasks can affect how our working memory performs. The image on the right shows that even though working memory is fragile and limited, once the information is learned, it is encoded or fixed, and then it is passed to long-term memory where it is stored and retrieved when needed. The forgetting curve. Did you know that we forget things that we've learned recently very quickly? The forgetting curve on the screen shows the percentage of memory retention in comparison to the number of days that we remember things that we just learned. The forgetting curve was a term coined by Ebbinghaus in the 1880s. Ebbinghaus was a German psychologist who pioneered the experimental study of memory. The curve here shows how information is lost over time when there is no attempt to retain it. Not to worry, all hope is not lost, as there are a few ways that we can combat the negative implications of the forgetting curve. With everything we've just learned about the forgetting curve, how can we ensure that our pupils are remembering more? One method is rehearsal. Rehearsal first and retrieval later. The second method is spaced learning. Advocates of spaced learning believe that this is the key to creating meaningful, long-lasting knowledge. Spaced learning is an approach designed to improve retention of information by getting the brain to return to, review, and consolidate information over extended periods of time. This means that the teaching of a new skill or concept happens at intervals, spaced apart to encourage children to recall what they've learned and also to commit it to long-term memory. Overlearning. To overlearn is to learn or practice something beyond the point of initial mastery. Expertise of a particular subject is the stage at which our pupils gain such a high level of mastery that engaging in that skill or completing that particular task becomes effortless. Now that we have covered the forgetting curve, let's now look at some of the proposed benefits of retrieval practice. Retrieval practice identifies gaps in knowledge. It helps us to make connections. And once those connections are made, we can then check with our pupils for any misunderstandings or misconceptions. Once that is done, our connections become even stronger. And once those connections have been made and they are robust, they can then be tested under pressure and stress. And by that, we mean assessments, either statutory assessments or teacher assessments. It then makes it easier to learn new things, as these benefits of retrieval practice have been tried and tested. On the next few slides, you will see some approaches that summarize the building blocks of Quality First teaching. You may have already accessed some of these in your own school and might already be familiar with some of these concepts. There are, however, some commonalities amongst these various models which we will now explore. This first model is from the National Association for Special Educational Needs. This summary of Quality First teaching was included in their 2021 publication entitled Inclusion, a Principled Guide for School Leaders. It focuses on what a culture of inclusion should look like in a school setting. Many of the common building blocks of Quality First teaching are represented here, such as modeling, retrieval, chunking, and effective questioning. This second model may be more familiar to you as it is based on Rosenshine's principles of instruction. Tom Sherrington's interpretation of Rosenshine's principles include Quality First teaching building blocks such as questioning, reviewing material, and sequencing. This third model is the Education Endowment Foundation's 5-a-day approach, an approach which has emerged from the extensive research that was undertaken in the production of the SEND in Mainstream Schools Guidance Report. You will also see some common themes here, such as scaffolding and explicit instructions. This is the updated West Sussex OAIP document, which is the ordinarily available inclusive practice document and can be viewed on the West Sussex County Council website. It is a guide for teaching and learning staff to support all children and young people. It includes prompts, strategies, and examples of good practice. This document highlights the reasonable adjustments that we all can make for all children and young people through Quality First teaching and universal provision. The first section of this document focuses on Quality First teaching. If you haven't already done so, please click the link on the slide, which will take you to the latest version of the OAIP. Having explored the different models of Quality First teaching, here are some common building blocks that appear across all the models. We believe that these values form the basis of Quality First teaching: ambition, inclusivity, and relationships. We should ensure that we are creating a culture of ambition for all of our pupils, that we are promoting inclusivity, and that we are also fostering positive relationships. The other common building blocks include the following: adaptation of resources so pupils can access their learning, ensuring appropriate challenge is given to stretch our pupils, checking, and this is checking for misunderstanding and also addressing misconceptions, chunking, breaking down complex tasks into smaller pieces so it is easier to learn and to remember. Others include dual coding, and this refers to the process of combining visuals, which are image-based, and verbal or language-based elements to convey information or explain a concept. Effective questioning. This assesses understanding and encourages deeper thinking. Giving explicit and simple instructions to our pupils and fostering independence amongst our learners. The use of manipulatives also help to build a strong foundation for more complex tasks and also to engage pupils with their learning. Modeling. This is used to demonstrate how a task should be completed, ensuring that we have clear aims and objectives for the lesson that will enable our pupils to achieve. Pre-teaching. This helps to prepare our pupils for the next steps of their learning. Retrieval practice, reviewing material that has been learnt recently. Scaffolding, to support our pupils in accessing their learning, attempting tasks with a view to becoming independent. Sequencing, this allows pupils to better understand a roadmap of their learning journey. The explicit use of vocabulary, As we know, vocabulary are words which allow pupils to understand new and linked concepts and also to communicate their learning. By explicit use, we mean the vocabulary is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. This sums up the section on the common building blocks of quality first teaching. My colleague Steve will now present the summary and next steps.
So now let's summarise what we've learnt today and what your next steps might be when you finish this training. You may remember that we said quality first teaching helps all children learn, not just those with special educational needs and disabilities. However, research evidence shows that children with SEND or from a disadvantaged background will benefit even more from a high quality first teaching approach, giving them more equitable access to a great education. Quality first teaching is a range of strategies and techniques. We call these building blocks, and they are based on a good understanding about the way children, and indeed all human beings, learn effectively. Quality first teaching is universal so that all children can engage with the learning. This means we can expect 100% participation from every child in the group. And fundamentally, quality first teaching relies on a culture of positive relationships with young people and high expectations for all of them. So in the next session of this two-part training offer, we'll revisit key messages from session 1, recognising that recall and retrieval are important for adults too. We'll also explore some different models and approaches of teaching assistant support and consider the impact of each one on children. We'll also suggest some top tips for applying these quality first teaching building blocks as a teaching assistant when you're working with children in the classroom or in a small group. And we'll also give you time to reflect on the learning from both sessions and consider next steps, including further reading and information on this topic. So here's what we suggest your next steps might be as you finish this part of the quality first teaching training. Firstly, set some time aside to review your notes and ask any questions you might have to an appropriate member of staff in your school, for example, a line manager or the senior leader with responsibility for teaching and learning. Look at the further reading and other resources that are included right at the end of this presentation. This includes the documents we've referred to, but also other resources such as video clips that you might find helpful and interesting. This is part 1 of a 2-part training offer. Try to set aside another hour within the next couple of weeks to complete this second part of the training. As we've learnt from the forgetting curve, leaving it too long will make it harder to re-engage next time. And finally, when you're back in class, try to spot any of the building blocks that we've talked about being used in your lesson. And are there appropriate opportunities where another building block might have helped? We really appreciate you taking the time to complete the first part of this Quality First Teaching for Teaching Assistants training. We look forward to seeing you again soon for part 2.